welcome and thank you for joining. We're going to wait another 1 minute here before we get started. And we'll come back to you live here in just a minute with a very informative session on cybersecurity. Back in 1 minute. Today we have Cy. Cy, I'm probably going to butcher your last name. Sturdivant, is that right?
There you go.
Cy Sturdivant. And he is with BKD Cyber, and he's going to talk to us today about cybersecurity and all things affected with COVID and some new things that he's seeing. And I'm really excited to have him today as a presenter. Again, we're not able to meet in person, which one day we will be able to do that. We're all in this together, but until then, you'll have to join me in webinars from the couch. And actually today I moved over to a desk, so we're making it a little more professional this morning. But Cy, I'll just kick it over to you and let you introduce yourself and get right into it.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. Pleasure to virtually meet you and be involved in this presentation. I know you all are extremely busy, so thank you for carving out some time. And it is a very important topic. I live in this world, so I know it's easy for me to sit here and present and talk about some concerns, and then it be ingested into your daily lives. I know it's difficult because you're just trying to get through the daily onslaught, but as you can see from the presentation, we do have a lot of cybersecurity concerns, and especially now with COVID and all of the work from home, it is now more than ever more impactful. I've been in the information security realm and cybersecurity realm for the past 15 years. My primary focus is serving financial institutions, so mortgage companies, banks, credit unions, all shapes and sizes of financial institutions is my primary focus. So I see a lot, I hear a lot. I'm going to bring some of that insight into this presentation as well. And as you can see from the video and this image, I cleaned up okay for this one, but about 3 months ago, this is how I looked. So I don't know if David, you can relate to that, or others on the call. But I think we all kind of like went into hiding, and then we kind of figured out this is the new normal. We can get through this. We've managed. We can use a lot of this stuff to our advantage. And hopefully,
that was me last week, actually.
Hopefully this presentation will be engaging and enjoyable. It is cybersecurity. And I know it's difficult for some to just kind of work their way through for about 50 minutes, but I try to bring a lot of energy into this. So if at the end of it, if you were bored or felt that it was too dry, I failed you, and I apologize, but that is not my intent. So hopefully there's going to be some good moments and good aspects of it. You can have some good takeaways. The agenda I worked with David as well, just to be sure that we're hitting on the most relevant topics for this group. It can vary from day to day, but there's really some cornerstone things that you can do every single day and threats to be aware of that really haven't changed over the past decade for that matter. But the way they're going about it, the tactics, that's always shifting. And we're going to be able to go through a lot of this stuff. I will be moving a little bit quickly just because I want to be sure we have time at the end to open it up for questions. But if you do have a question that I hit on something, put it into the question box. It'll be there. I may be able to address it as we're going through, but if not, we'll definitely address it at the end. I'll hit on some good statistics. Won't camp out a lot there. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But for this group, I'll just hit on the hot topics, the high level details, hit on some really good best practices and common things that you should be doing. And again, like I said, we'll try to make this as painless as possible. But overall, why are we doing this, right? Why are we talking about cybersecurity? Well, the main reason is because when I go into organizations and I see people treating cybersecurity with this approach, I'm not very happy, and I see it a lot. But if you're entering a venue, if you're going to a building that's responsible for your safety, and this is how the security officer or guard is treating threats entering into that organization, how many of you would be really comfortable with that? Not many. Just quick, you're good. Go ahead, go on in. How many of you are treating email like that? How many of you are treating communications back and forth with some escrow attorneys or title agents, or even your internal people are treating it like that? You just kind of take it at face value. That's why we're having this presentation today. That's why we're diving in, because the mortgage industry has completely gone through that digital transformation over the past 10 years. And that technology has been really, really good to serve your clientele. Right now, of all things, COVID has been extremely damaging to some industries, but for your industry, it has been very, very beneficial. You're very busy now more than ever. We'll see where it all falls from a back end perspective. We were just talking about that, David and I were, but overall, your days are very busy, and you're working at home with your families and your kids at the kitchen table, trying to do school. You're distracted. You're being pulled thin. But at the same time, you're supposed to be responsive, right? You're supposed to be responsive to your employees and also responsive to your customers, because they have all this information now. They can act really, really quickly on that. So you have to move fast, because if you don't reply with the specific rate or that information, or you don't have the right personality for it, they're going to move on to somebody else. So I know that's a challenge each and every one of you face. But that mobile technology, most of you working from home right now have your laptops, you have your tablets, you may go out and see some customers if you can. But that technology is why the cybersecurity concerns are substantially more impactful in 2020, especially because of COVID and everybody kind of going into that remote workforce than it ever has before. And you can see and I think most of you on the call, if not everyone, know that it is a major concern. You see the statistics, you have internal communications. There's a lot of fraudulent wire transfer requests, especially around the real estate factor. They're going to the cyber criminals will interject themselves, trying to get and access and compromise that information or those funds, specifically the source of some of these loans. They're going to get those funds before it can be closed and go to the legitimate sources. We're talking about billions of dollars, not a couple of hundred, not even tens of millions, billions of dollars that are being compromised and stolen because of I would say tactics around phishing that we're going to be diving into shortly, but more from they're using your own methods against you. They know you want to be responsive. They know you want to help. They know you want to be flexible. And they're compromising these email accounts of your customers or those relationships, and they're watching and they're just diving in and timing it just right. And if you don't follow things specifically the way you're supposed to by policy, you're going to have substantial issues. And you can see here the threats have been around for a long time, but again, from a COVID-19 work from home, they are exceptionally magnified. Phishing is going to be the primary one. Most of you know what phishing is. It's that fraudulent, malicious email that is sent by a cyber criminal intended to get something from you. They want you to click something. They want you to reply back with an ID and password. They want you to click on an application, or click on a attachment to install an application, because if they can get you to do any of that, they've won. They could have a potential avenue into your system or into that transaction that you're working on. There's a lot of things. Again, that business email compromise is the major one. Ransomware is another. It may not be impactful for the entire organization, but it very well could be. But specifically, your machine, you could lose your machine for a week, a day or two, depending on how quickly they can get that back and restore it. How many of you right now could imagine going through your daily lives without your laptop for a day or two, a week? That's probably pretty scary for a lot of you. But if you don't follow these procedures, if you're not on the lookout for some of these things, it will be a factor. It will be something that hits very soon. But a lot of the times when I'm going through the case studies and the reports and all the statistics, when you boil it down to how does this really happen, especially from a business email compromise, inadequate training, because you weren't able to identify that phishing email. You bypassed a procedure because that customer or that relationship had the right phrasing, had the right language, and you decided, you know what, I'm going to help them out here. Or you followed that shadow policy. Maybe we'll use David as an example. Maybe you work for David and David's been compromised and he sends this email, do this now, get it out by end of day, top client, etc. We've got to get this done. Yes, sir, absolutely. Well, that's not policy, but is that accepted internally? Can you do that from time to time? They know these tricks, and sometimes if that's allowed, that's where they're going to get it. Again, as I referenced before, COVID-19 changed the landscape for cybersecurity. You may not have felt that within your organization because of good security protocols, but look at this chart. From January 1st to the end of March, that trajectory, that's domain registrations correlated with the pandemic. When the growth and all the fear around that happened, you had a lot of domains being registered to not necessarily the most legitimate source of business. And as you can see from the list here, a lot of that went to phishing, malicious spam, ransomware type things that are being backed into this. But when they're creating these domains, they're not doing it from a lazy perspective. They're doing it with a very legitimate purpose. They want these sites and they want these things to look extremely good in order to trick you. So again, they're not going to look like they're from a foreign source. They're going to look like it's from the WHO or from a legitimate file donation site, to be sure that when you get this request and you click an email, they may have used somebody that is in your network. Hey, I've got this opportunity to help out locally. Click here to learn more. Here's a flyer that we were able to put together in order to donate to those that were impacted by feeling this situation. Typically, it's COVID, but it can vary a lot depending on where you're at. Because obviously, from a Nashville perspective, where I'm located, and most of you are probably around this area, when the tornadoes came through in the first quarter. Cyber criminals use that. So it's a lot of times they're going to be playing on that emotional side of it, and we'll give you some red flags to pinpoint. But again, they'll be centered around installing something or getting you to provide payment information or getting that information from your clients. From that threat perspective, a lot of times the phishing tactics will be in some regard framed up around this. So a lot of times if they want you to click something, it's going to have that COVID alert. It's going to have some kind of survey to it. One thing that has been very, very, successful has been the HR benefit updates here lately with COVID, because a lot of companies are being impacted. They're laying off personnel. Things are changing. And from that respect, say, for instance, you get an email from your management and says, hey, we're instituting furloughs. You have been selected. Click here to learn more specific details. And there was an attachment. How many of you would have that internal what, and click and read? A lot of these phishing emails will have that theme, will have that approach. And we're seeing, even when we're doing our ethical engagements, we're seeing 30, 40, 50% hit rates, where 2 to 3% is normally what we see if they're really well trained, but COVID changed all of that. The standard other things too, especially as kind of we're entering more into the fall and holiday season, which is kind of crazy. The order tracking. So be careful if you have anything coming to your corporate email with tracking, et cetera. And then again, that business email compromise, those fraudulent wire transfer requests, they're going to look really good sometimes, but oftentimes there's going to be a few red flags. Being able to identify that is going to be the top concern, because if they can get you to click, if they can get you to provide anything from an ID and password, and again, you directly, but flip this to your relationships that you have in the transaction channel. So again, those title agencies, the escrow attorney, et cetera, or even the bank personnel, if you're kind of tied with the bank and you're going to have a lot of different institutions that are in that channel, if they can get any one of you to give that information and gain access to an email, especially a personal email from a customer perspective, they have access to this. I'll give you a minute to kind of go through some of that. The social media aspect of it, the bank account information. Maybe you've set them up a secure session on a online platform through your mortgage software. They can upload and interact, but maybe the login information was sent to their personal email. Maybe they emailed themselves. Maybe they put something in there they weren't supposed to. If it's in that email, the cyber criminal has access to it. And more than likely, they can move throughout this universe in terms of using that information against your customer and being able to send that information to you. And from a recap perspective, most of you, again, have been trained or have heard about this, but maybe this is kind of from a different angle. So how does it really work? Well, as you can see from the slide, they're going to access that email through phishing. Okay, once they have that email, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to start altering things immediately and saying, hey, we've had a change, we've done this, we've done that. They're going to relay that information to you in some shape or form. And once they do that, they're hoping that you don't follow protocol and you just make the changes. Yeah, absolutely, no problem. We'll take care of that. You've got that customer service mentality. Or they're going to divert those funds. And oftentimes, they're not going to do it immediately when it doesn't make sense. They're going to watch, and they're going to watch that email. They're going to watch the communications. And right when it's time to close or do things from a transaction perspective, they're going to interject a change. They're going to interject a request. And if that's different from what you've set up before, you absolutely need to vet that through some out-of-band perspective, doing a call, etc. And once they're stolen, they're obviously, taking outside the domestic U.S. And if it's outside 24 hours, it's going to be extremely difficult to get that back. But what happens if you do fall victim? What happens if you had a gut feeling, you went ahead with it just because it was the wrong time of day, or maybe a Friday, you had a deadline to meet? Immediately contact the bank or escrow holder to secure those funds and try to get it back. Oftentimes, like I said before, if you do it within 24 hours, if you have a good response team from the mortgage company side or the bank side, they can often contact the FBI. You can do some type of kill chain, wire fraud kill chain maneuver, and extract back those funds. The earlier, the better. So obviously, you want to prevent these, but if all else fails, contact your incident response team. I did put a little asterisk there because you may not have a response team. You may have a security officer. You may have a mortgage fraud resource or an internal investigator. Whatever that looks like, whatever your training says to notify, that's who you notify. But earlier the better, for sure. And then obviously, if you do catch something, notifying everybody in that communications channel, notifying your customers, notifying any agent or anybody that you can think of as it relates to that loan is very much impactful, very important to be sure that they're all aware. And hopefully they will do the same for you. So sometimes you'll get that notification. So from a cybersecurity trends and concerns, obviously we hit on some pretty big items and threats. Obviously we don't want anything to happen, because if something does happen and it's a very large client, maybe it's a very well-known individual, or it could be a standard, it doesn't matter who they are, you always want to treat them as equal and keep them secure. But your reputational aspect will always come into play, because more than likely they're going to voice their frustration and concerns on social media, etc. And if it's bad enough, it's going to hit the press, and that's what you absolutely don't want to hear about. Because when it does hit the press, it goes into these statistics, it goes into these breach reports. And as you can tell, from 2018 to 2019, we saw a major increase. It was actually very interesting. 2017 to 2018, it was actually a weird dip. It actually decreased. But we're right back into what we thought was going to be the case for 2019. 2020, due to COVID and all the things that we're hearing and reading about, I'm expecting that to jump up substantially. Again, so we can all do our part. We can all be on the lookout and be on guard to stop this stuff, because we don't want to be one of these statistics. We don't want to be that percentage. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult to catch some of this stuff. So from a financial services perspective, just to kind of bring it home, the average total cost of a data breach, if your organization is compromised, $5.86 million in this industry is what it's going to take to kind of get out of that data breach. Not to mention the funds that are lost off of a one-off, two-off type situation. The records, about 210 is the average cost per record. So think about all the loans, all the transactions that you're doing now. And then if you have an issue or you've had one in the past, around 30% is your likelihood for having something else occur within 2 years. Again, this is not intended to scare or spook. It's intended to inform. So be aware that if you've experienced any of those threats that we've talked about, more than likely it's gonna come back again, because you fell victim to it before. And now, if you've had these and you've stopped and you've blocked and you're relentless and those controls, your internal procedures are top notch, they may end up moving on to somebody else, because they're not gonna put up a lot of time and energy if they think it's futile. And again, some of these response things are going to be more from the back end perspective, but they can impact everything you're trying to do from the front line. But the key thing there, and you can see from the statistic on the right, is making sure that you respond. And again, that a lot of my presentations have themes. So awareness is going to be a big one, and responding communication is going to be the other one in this, because if you do identify and stop, that's the big thing. If you're not able to stop or identify on the preventative side, being able to respond quickly thereafter, or identifying those red flags, that's going to be the biggest one, because everything that we're seeing from 2020, especially right now, it is it's a little bit depressing to read all the different things, because when you think about the pandemic and you think about the global perspective and issues that we're facing and lives that are being lost and families that are being torn apart, to think about a cyber criminal taking advantage of that to get a few $100,000. I mean, yes, it's $100,000 and a lot more than that sometimes, but it's just like, has that what humanity's come to these days, right? So a lot of what I read about is very depressing, and you can tell from this one, they're not changing. This is inching up year after year. But that's why, individuals like myself have dedicated their lives to like, hey, let's go in, let's consult, let's train, let's audit, let's test. And then from your perspective, if you're doing the right things, you're protecting your customers, you're protecting the organization. And that's ultimately what it's all about. So with that theme, we'll kind of hit on some best practices. But before we kind of really dive into like those best practices, as we did before with the, is this your approach? Let's assess your personal risk appetite. So as we go through this exercise, you may be working from home and you might not be able to, but just kind of visualize this. And if you're in a room, in an area, just kind of walk through this process with some of your coworkers. So take out your mobile phone or grab it from the desk because it's not far from you. Unlock it so you can see your apps. You can scroll through everything. Now give it to somebody. Give it to a coworker. Give it to your spouse. Give it to me. Just pretend you're giving it to me. And we'll get it back at the end of the session. So about 30 minutes, somebody's going to have your phone, everything therein. Who just got a little nervous, right? How many of you panicked? Your email, your text messages, your pictures. Not many people are going to be comfortable with that, right? But do you have that same level of sensitivity? Do you have that same level of absolutely not? This is not leaving my side. I'm going to secure it. If it goes missing, I'm going to look for it immediately. I'm going to notify. I'm going to panic, but I will get that device back. I will be sure that it's protected. Are you doing that with your corporate information? This is a good exercise to go through. If you're not, ultimately, that's where I'm trying to encourage you to kind of get in that thought process, have that mentality, because if the entire culture does that, you're going to have very little cybersecurity impacts because everybody will be thinking about it the right way. And again, from that thought process, there's some do's and don'ts. And again, I hope this is not the first time this information has been relayed, but great refreshers, things that I hit on a lot. And specifically, this has been tailored a little bit more for the mortgage perspective. But as you kind of go through your daily routine, do be cautious of what you're clicking on, right? So the think, don't click. We're going to be hitting on more of those best practices for phishing. Share that contact information. Earlier the better. Establish everything. Hey, here's my contact information, the email, the phone numbers, my cell phone will not change. Here's the key information for others. That's what you want to be sure that's relayed. So if there's any request to change or call me on this one, what I sent before is wrong, red flag, right? We always want to be sure that's communicated. Be sure that you're not doing anything from a wire transfer perspective through email. Pick up the phone, talk to somebody, figure out a way to meet face-to-face, have them go to a branch location, something. Don't do that through an attachment via email. And if you do use that through email, make sure it's an approved form of secure email. Maybe they're going and logging into that secure portal, doing something like that. That's what they need to use. Don't use open email. Open, standard, basically like personal email or your standard email that's not encrypted. Everything through that should be just quick dialogue. Hey, did you have a chance to upload the files that we talked about? Sure did. Check your site. That kind of communication is great, but everything else, no confidential information needs to be in there. And you can see that it is the do not send anything confidential, personal information via email unless it's encrypted. And again, if you click those phishing emails, it's a matter of time before there's going to be an issue. So hopefully those are some good suggestions, do's and don'ts. And then some other best practice suggestions, again, from a COVID perspective, and everybody kind of from whether you're still sheltering in place, working from home, whatever you want to call that. These are some key things to keep in mind, because if we're working at home, and we've been working at home for a long time, we are desperate to get out and have some interaction. So we find ourselves going to a coffee shop, going somewhere that has free public Wi-Fi. Oh, I can use my VPN, but what if you forget? What if you use it and it's just kind of glitching up and you turn it off? things that you go through and communicate, things that are sent through that wireless channel can be compromised. So this image before truly is factual. They can intercept everything that you're sending back and forth among everybody else on that wireless access point. So be aware of that. The same goes for your home Wi-Fi. If you have not secured your home Wi-Fi, and we don't even have enough time to dive into all the specifics of how to do that, but if you're not using a really good secure password on your home router, if you're broadcasting that SSID to the entire neighborhood, and when you log into your a new device and you say find my home Wi-Fi, you probably see 15 or 20 others that are around you that are doing that. But if you're not protecting the home Wi-Fi, how many devices do you think are connected to that? Take a stab at it. Think through that process. If you're thinking 8 to 10, bump that up to probably 30 or 40, because you don't think about things like your Rokus or your Apple TVs or your smart devices, the Internet of Things, all the Alexas, every cell phone, every tablet, any device that's ever connected before. It gets pretty high. And again, if you're not using that network the best way, you're potentially going to have issues if you're using your corporate device on that same network. A couple other things, and I don't want to spend too much time, but at the same time, I want to relay some key things. One of the things we've heard of a lot here lately is public charging stations. So you see this a lot at the airports, which is probably not a major concern right now for most of you because you're not flying anywhere. But there's a lot of easy ways cyber criminals can interject a filter, interject a sniffer, that when you plug in, everything that they can access on your phone is pretty much fair game. Same thing for, we see those stations every now and then at fitness centers, at coffee shops. They want you to be able to have, charging capabilities, but I urge you not to use those. And if you do find yourself using them from time to time, there's little devices that you can buy to filter out that protect you if you need to know what those are or have one. But more than likely, not a big factor, but just wanted to bring that to your attention. Some of the other best practices that are always around, but now more than ever, is don't leave that device in your vehicle, and don't leave it in an open or common area. Like, oh, I'm just going to grab my coffee. Oh, I'm just going to go hit the restroom and be right back. If you leave it, a lot of times these people are looking for opportunities. They're going to swap it and be out the door in no time. We've heard many of those cases already with lost and stolen devices, especially over the past 6 months. More than I'd like to admit, but it kind of took me off guard. At least every client has had some type of issue or had an issue within their network. Don't let your family use your corporate device. Use that laptop. This is a big one as well. When I bring up this topic or conversation with our clients, they just kind of stare at me saying, well, what's so wrong about that? That they're just checking their email. They're just logging into their school portal. Are you sure? Did you sit there and watch everything they're doing? So you kind of know where I'm going there. They could visit social media platforms. They can do a number of different things without your knowledge. And if they are accessing personal email and clicking on things that their friends send them, they're going to compromise your device. And then all of a sudden, you did nothing, but it's still compromised. That's a big one these days as well. Kind of wrapping up this slide, be careful of online meeting requests of those that you do not know. If it's outside your network and outside your channel and you're not expecting it, decline it. If there's a phone number, call that phone number to find out, hey, who's this? Just making sure. Don't just click and log in or accept the request. A lot of successes around that here lately as well. And again, approved secure file transfer services within your organization is paramount. Don't rely on a client saying, oh, well, I'll do everything through this platform, and you've never heard of it. Be sure that you're sticking with yours. And last but not least, again, you haven't thought about this for a long time, but be careful what you print at home or what you take home, because a lot of times you're not destroying that through your normal shred bins or shred process. So a lot of things to be aware of. But again, kind of going back into that phishing perspective, kind of getting our minds around that, because more than likely, if anything happens, it will be through phishing. Best practices 101 does not change, hasn't changed in years, is if you think it's a phishing email, if it has the red flags, don't click on anything. Don't open attachments. Don't even click on the images. So for instance, if this image is located within that email and it's kind of small and you want to see if you can expand it, don't even touch it, because oftentimes it's an executable. They're going to have a hyperlink. They're going to have something behind that image that will take you somewhere to a website or install something. It's pretty sophisticated what they can do. Don't reply to the sender. Don't say, who is this, etc. If it looks odd and suspicious, just leave it alone, or report it. Report it to the IT department. If you have an IT department, or you have a communication method for making sure that is sent to the appropriate parties, definitely do that. Forwarding, not a great idea unless it's specifically requested, but you do want to notify your clients. If it came from a customer and you think it's odd or doesn't follow the same communication, like maybe the grammar is a little off, maybe something's just unique about it, pick up the phone and call that individual. Let them know that they might have an issue. Ask them if they sent the email. If you get no's to anything like that, that's a sign that there's been a compromise somewhere in the channel, and take extreme actions and precautions afterwards. Ultimately, deleting that email is the best thing. So from a lessons learned perspective, in different sessions and different areas, I typically say, hey, does anybody have a lessons learned? Does anybody have an example they want to share? I will actually open that up to see if somebody has a statement they want to relay or verbally say. More than likely not, but I always put it out there. I do have one. It's going to be pretty straightforward. Just making sure there's not anybody. They may not even be able to come through. I'm not sure about the presentation setup. But you probably do have a case study. You probably did have something that either you may have been a part of that may have almost happened, or you just heard of it because it happened and they sent communication internally. They trained everybody. This is what happened. This is what to be aware of. But the situation happened last year, and it's, again, every business email compromise from a case study is almost identical. There was a very sweet couple. They were elderly. I believe this was out of Oklahoma, so my managing director was a part of this case study. He heard about it. He actually, talked to the institution and got all the information. But they were doing everything digital. They were going through. They even had like virtual conversations. They were sending some things through email, but nothing, out of the ordinary. And as it was getting closer to close and get everything from a funds transfer perspective set up, that's exactly what happened. The cyber criminal had access to their email, had been watching everything, knew how stuff was filtering through, and sent the request on behalf of that customer. They used their own email. It was not a suspicious or spoofed email. They used it, they sent it, they altered the bank account information. I believe it was the morning of, or the day before closing. And you can imagine what happened afterwards. Everything that they owned, every penny that they had dedicated and had built into this process was sent to that cyber criminal. And it was gone. They were not able to extract back any of it, which is pretty rare, because I think they caught it pretty fast. But unfortunately, you can imagine all the litigation, fingers being pointed, etc. But nobody called the client. They just followed through. They did it from a customer service mentality. So things that I've built in already to this presentation. And I think it was around $400,000, which I'm sure from this area, you see millions in loans being sent out, not just a few $100,000. To them, it was everything. It was their life savings. It was everything that they were hoping to move into a retirement property and never think back again. So if we don't do this right, if we don't make sure those that we interact with from a transaction, we can destroy lives. That's probably not on the top of your mind most days, but that's my encouragement, is to think about that. Maybe we should question things a little bit more. And ultimately, that's why we're going to stick on this section. So how to identify and prevent these issues? Again, I'm going to go right back to phishing. Thinking about, is this normal? Is this email expected? Are they asking things that are, privy to what we would normally have a conversation about? Maybe it's with a client. Maybe it's with, a relationship or a trusted party. Maybe it's an employee. Maybe it's your family. You just never know what these emails are going to be like when they're coming into your organization, coming into your corporate email. But always thinking before you click. You can see that item. Making sure that there's any link, you kind of hover over it, you look to see if it's actually going to take you where you think it will, or just go to the site, go to the source. Don't click the link in an email. Don't follow the instructions if it seems a little odd. If they want you to put an ID and password, or provide something, or install software, or click a document, oftentimes you want that document to be relayed through the proper channels. There should be some type of red flag if you're following procedure. But at the end of the day, sometimes there won't be. Sometimes you really have to look hard and think through the process to identify, because again, from a statistic perspective, when you dive back into anything, it's a spear phishing attempt. They targeted somebody. They targeted the customer. They targeted you. They targeted the bank processor. They targeted the title escrow. They targeted somebody. And if they can interject themselves into one, they might be able to get it somewhere else. So it makes it extremely difficult to find. But ultimately, best practices is never give out that sensitive information via email, like we talked about before. If you really feel a need or some emotional urge, whether it's anger, fear, curiosity, or just empathy, right? Right now, it's empathy because you want to help, you want to do something. But a lot of times they're using trust. And that's why from this conversation, it's very difficult to identify, because you trust those that you do business with. Again, I referenced those in in the transaction channel, those title attorneys, the escrow agents, etc. If you trust them and you're used to getting correspondence, if you get a request from them, maybe your procedure is, hey, if it's changing payment information, we got to pick up the phone and call them. Maybe you didn't. If you bypass that procedure one time, it could come back to haunt you. Just like we touched on before, oftentimes it is a bypass procedure. If any of these factors apply, I think you've got yourself a phishing email. And always be on the lookout for that. As we're kind of nearing the end and being sure that we kind of hit on some good topics, one thing that I always like to build into presentations, and oftentimes it's like, really? Passwords? Yes, passwords. Oftentimes, if you're using especially work from home, you're not thinking about security the way you used to. If you've diverted back to, and hopefully none of you are using these weak passwords that you see from an image on the right of the slide here. If it's not complex enough, if it's not long enough, if you're not following some of these key things, more than likely, if a cyber criminal can interject or intercept that password, oftentimes it's not going to be in a clear text perspective. So from behind the scenes, everything that you type in is typically hashed. And by hashed, it's encrypted. And that encrypted hash is going somewhere to say, I'm Cy, I work with BKD, I'm a user, I'm authenticated, give me access to what I need access to. And there's a secure mechanism there to say, yep, I'm authorized. Well, if you're on public Wi-Fi, if you're using an unencrypted protocol, if you're sending emails to a site, or you're clicking on something and inputting IDs and passwords, if these passwords are not secure, you're in a world of trouble. Because oftentimes cyber criminals can crack these passwords with minimal effort if they're not complex, if they're not long enough. And we're going to hit on some key things. So don't forget the importance of passwords. I'm sure that's, again, with your world, that's if you're getting any internal training that's being shoved down your throat. But from an IT auditor perspective, those that we run our penetration test engagements and password assessments, oftentimes you can have the most sophisticated system in the world to grab and identify and detect things. But if the user has used a short or weak password, and we can compromise that, that gives us an angle in. And we can typically use that access to get to something else, and get to something else, and get to something else. Or if you don't have multi-factor authentication required, and again, that's going to be from a corporate perspective, we access your email because you gave it to us, or we cracked that password. So it can be used against you in a number of ways. And also that last bullet, and we're going to be touching on this here shortly too, but do not use any password for your corporate information, your work computers, accounts, applications. That better not match anything from a personal, social, you name it, not even your bank account information. All passwords have to be unique and have to be different, because if they compromise one, they're going to bleed into something else. They're going to use that against you. And again, the training that I'm trying to relay to you for your purposes, the same applies to your customers, because they're oftentimes not trained as well as they should be. And if they're doing it, their email, social media, some other company that's been breached, think about all the hotels, the restaurants. It's a big issue for sure. And as you can tell, 81% of confirmed breaches are often due to weak, reused, stolen passwords. Again, some type of phishing gave them an angle. They did some reconnaissance. They were able to extract out some things, and were able to use that to their advantage because it was weak and they cracked it with minimal effort. We use a password cracking device that's about $4,500, give or take. Imagine the capacity and the ability of that, which does a fantastic job of cracking passwords in a few days. Imagine countries. but have potentially unlimited resources that have hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to crack passwords. Now, the odds of them targeting your institution or you is slim to none, but if they grab it as a bucket of potential, they've accessed it from a site, they've accessed it from a breached institution, they're going to broadcast that and blast that out to see if there's any takers. So trust me, it's a world you don't want to be in when you have a compromised account or identity. It leads to a lot of headaches and a lot of compliance issues. And I think most of you probably know when we're doing surveys, we read reports, most of you know that you're not supposed to reuse them, but you're still reusing them because it's easy. It's a headache to remember all these things, or you're writing them down, or you're putting them somewhere where it can be compromised again. And again, if you're creating passwords with some of the information here to the right, we will crack that password in seconds to minutes, more than likely. So keep track of, or be aware of that, and keep track of your passwords, secure them. I know it's not easy from my internal perspective at the firm here. I have a lot of passwords to keep up with. And on the personal side, I have a lot of passwords to keep up with. There's password managers, there's password vaults. A lot of them have definitely improved, but you have to choose the right one. So if there's any questions or follow-up on that, I can give some good insights on that as well. But ultimately, don't be like this guy. I love this image. Steve Carell's hilarious, but don't do this. Okay, don't get lazy. Like I said before, interjecting some humor. When I'm having these presentations face to face, a lot of people laugh because it's funny, and then they laugh because they pretty much know others do something like this. So obviously, don't make it that easy for the cyber criminals. So let's do a quick quiz, and then we'll move in kind of to more of the Q&A session. So password 123 exclamation point. I think we all know that is a weak password. So as we move through, kind of just think to yourself, think out loud, whether you think it's weak or strong. AP 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty weak. Again, characters, numbers, one special character. How about this one? That's a pretty good one, right? They butchered Nashville. They threw in all kind of special characters, changed up everything. That is also weak, and I will tell you why here shortly. New York Minute. Weak. Known phrase. Music City 1, 2, 3. That's got to be a good one too, right? Also weak. So think about this one. So online coffee wine 1. Is this a weak, moderate, or strong, or very strong? Looks kind of similar, right? It's actually very strong. It's a very strong password. Again, we have another example. How many of you would have ever thought about using a password like this? Well, if you did, you'd also have a very strong password. And then last but not least, you probably see the theme here, right? This is also a very strong password. So the reason I'm hitting on this, and again, the reason it's impactful is because we are using these every day on a multitude of different platforms. And if we get lazy, we could do this great for 3 or 4 months, and then we're required to change, and we can put just a very simple low-level password, summer 2020 exclamation point. If it accepts it and you think that's secure, you're definitely wrong. So let's definitely migrate into the last 3 examples, taking random words that may mean something to you or nothing to you, but it's just easy to remember. But the way these password cracking devices work, we either have to know the password, so it's been compromised before, or it's a dictionary word. It's somewhere in the dictionary, and we can put rules against that. So Nashville is going to be in a word table somewhere. But Nashville, and changing it up like we've been instructed to do, take a word, put the @ symbol instead of A, or a 1 instead of an I, or a 3 instead of an E. The password cracking software interjects rules for that, and it will tell basically the computer and algorithm to say, interject these changes and see if it works. And it can do that blindingly fast, like hundreds of thousands of attempts per second. So think through that. But when you bring in random words and random numbers and characters, a dictionary can't really do that effectively. It doesn't know the proper combinations. It takes it extremely too long to crack those passwords, but it's easy to remember. How many can remember all the @ and $ and symbols? It's hard sometimes, but when you just say online coffee wine 1, kind of just rolls off the tongue, right? And I wouldn't use this one. It could be in a dictionary word somewhere, but It's good training. It's good things to think through. So from a final thoughts and kind of wrapping this up, we touched on it before. You're very busy right now. Most of you are always busy, but right now more than ever, it's very difficult to tackle your daily responsibilities. Maybe you're helping out in other areas. Maybe you're trying to check in on team members because of COVID. Maybe you're working from home. Maybe you're taking care of your spouse because they're furloughed. Maybe you're trying to navigate kids going through virtual learning because, schools are closed down. I have no idea how soon we're going to be able to get through this. But one thing's for sure, we can do it, and we will do it together. We will all make it through this. But the new normal that we're experiencing now versus the next stage, I don't really know what that looks like either. I don't know the timeline on that. But from a work perspective, a cyber perspective, a mental perspective, just stay focused. Know that you've got people within your network, obviously those on the call today, hopefully you have relationships with, that you can pick up the phone and call David, pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, are you experiencing this? This is just very difficult. I'm getting just burnt out with the relentless aspects of this role and responsibility. Or, your security officer is breathing down your neck because you failed a social engineering test or your password wasn't strong enough. Hopefully this kind of gives you some insight to why that's so important. But at the end of the day, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to do your best practice. You've got to take care of everything from your family perspective, and that bleeds into work. Because again, if you're doing these things yourself and you have conversations with your team members and you bring this into your corporate life and you're following those procedures and practices, at the end of the day, you're not going to have these substantial issues that I read about almost on a weekly basis. So hopefully, again, so from a recap perspective, some of these statements here, again, just friendly reminders as we kind of go into the phase of Q&A. I haven't seen any questions come through yet, but we've got about 13 minutes to address some questions. I'll turn it back over to David and Caitlin. Is there anything that came through that I didn't see, or any questions that the group wants to pose?
So I don't see any open questions, but I'll ask some questions.
Absolutely. Let's hear them.
So these might not even be mortgage related, but they're just a couple things I jotted down.
Okay.
So, and forgive me if you don't know the answer, or if you want to get the answer, that's fine. But it's just two things. 5G. Are we going to see any additional impacts from 5G? I think I understand it a little bit, but I'm not sure if there's any extra things we need to worry about in the infancy stages of that.
Based on what I'm seeing, there will be some impacts, but I kind of focus more on the blocking and tackling. So the 5G is just the communication channel, the wireless channel. It gives more capability to devices, but the devices themselves are typically where the vulnerability is. So if you're not maintaining an up-to-date mobile device, if you're not updating your software, if you're not using security software from your organization or your personal devices at home, if you're not maintaining them or not putting that appropriate security, if you're not doing strong passwords, that's where your security is going to be, not necessarily from the 5G or the 4G that we're using now. The only impact that would probably be more of an unknown is the Internet of Things. So think about all the devices that can connect to basically anything, whether it's a smart watch, a refrigerator, your washer and dryer, a toaster, TV. Those devices, the more capability you give them to communicate and exchange information, we've already seen a substantial amount of issues around that. That undoubtedly will continue to rise because of 5G. It just gives more flexibility and capability to mobile devices. So.
Gotcha. Thank you. And the one that I know my wife's dying to hear the answer to. So we've heard a lot in the news about these apps that the current administration's banning or looking to ban, TikTok specifically. How do they steal information from an app like TikTok? And that, like I said, that's not mortgage related or anything. That's actually just for my wife, who wanted me to ask. But
the how is extremely difficult to explain. I myself do not know the ins and outs of it. The pen test team that I work with, basically say the same thing. If the configuration of that app, what's being shared, the data that's extracted, because every mobile phone, Apple or Android, is a platform. And the apps that are designed to work within that platform, you want it to be installed. You want to click. If you want to upload a photo, you push that button. There's my photos. It extracts it out. It uploads it to the cloud to that site. We don't care or think about how it does that. But if along the way those apps are not configured properly, if they're sending it to other things, if they're extracting out information, so typically, from something like this or a malicious app, it's either it's sending it somewhere else, it's storing it itself, it's extracting, it's accessing things that it shouldn't. That's typically where you're going to get into some issues. TikTok, I don't have enough time in the world to explain all the frustrations and headaches and pain points, but for your wife's purposes, if she has it on her phone or anybody on this meeting, delete it right now. It's not, the damage is probably done, but you don't want it on your device because it maintains a constant connection. So.
Awesome. No, thank you. It looks like Caitlin just sent something through chat.
Okay.
It's a question from Chris Kujula. I don't know if you see it. Let me know, and if not, I can read it.
Yeah, let me. I've got the questions up. I don't believe I opened up the chat. Let me get up here and see. No, David, I'm not seeing that. So if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll just read it verbatim. It says, "Hi, great presentation. Anytime I am suspicious about an email attachment, I open it on my personal cell phone, iPhone. First thinking if there's malware, et cetera, it will not have any impact on these devices as opposed to a PC or a laptop. Is that true?"
It is not true. So the biggest impact, yes, more than likely it is built for PC. It's going to be some type of Windows type vulnerability, but there is so much mobile malware available and growing now that they're almost expecting it, especially now. Again, all the COVID stuff that we touched on, they're almost expecting it to be accessed on a tablet or a mobile phone because you're going to be pulled away from that computer all the time. So if that is your mechanism for checking if it's malicious or not, you're right. You could click on one and it may be like, oh, that's interesting, or it didn't work. But more than likely, it's going to install something on your phone eventually, or it could be fine. But that I would say that is definitely not the route to go, is to test attachments, to test anything on a mobile device. That used to be true 4 to 5 years ago. Mobile malware was not anywhere near it is now. Apple and Android especially, we have a lot of mobile malware associated with that, but Apple is not immune to it. So I would say use your internal security scanning software, scan the email, scan the attachment. If it's unknown, if you don't know the individual, but you think it might be important, hopefully most of you know that you can contact IT. They can look at this. They can do some scanning themselves. But ultimately, if it's suspicious, I'd say you have to delete it. If there's any sense of something's not right about this, don't go the cautionary, well, I'll go outside the channel, and if I feel good about it, then I'll open it up on the laptop. Just delete it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see any other questions. And thank you for answering my questions. That was great. If you want to throw your information back up on the screen real quick, Si,
Absolutely.
that way people have a chance to get in touch with you if they do think of anything. That would be awesome. And like I said, this presentation will be posted to our website. So hopefully we can get it shared, and because there's a lot of good content there, and I really appreciate you sharing with our group today. That was a lot of good stuff.
My pleasure, and appreciate the time. And like you said, if there's any question that didn't want to be posed today, I mean, my email's right here. It can be a simple one. It can be a very complex one. I may have to reach out to you and answer that one. But yeah, if there's anything to follow up with, I'd be happy to help and address it as I can. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. For those on the call, thanks so much for joining. Please join us next month for another episode of Mortgage Bankers from the Couch with David, your president. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.